Hello, hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers Sunday Sermon. This is your host, David Johnson. Let's get started here. We are in week 2 of the Summer of Morality. Last week, we did definitions. I encourage you to go back and listen to that show, or at the very least, find the page where that show is listed. It'll be the same page that this one is listed, and read the write-up, because that is a very long and detailed write-up of my definitions of words like morality and objective and values and things of that nature. I have a little bit more of that in this week's write-up, and so here's where we do a little bit of housekeeping. Gone are the days when I do a separate page for every time I turn on a mic. That's just not realistic. However, in a situation like this, there's a temptation to do it, and you're going to think, well, it would make more sense if you do it. So I just want to explain why I'm still not doing it. Reason number one, I don't want to. But beyond that, I recognize the challenge of long write-ups. And you're going to want to read the most current write-up. But if I put the write-up in the top of the page where the blog is, and I write somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 word write-ups every time, it's going to get really, really long. It's going to be too long to scroll. It's just going to be very problematic. So I'm not going to do that, but I'm also not making a separate page. So for the write-ups, I'm just going to drop them in the comments. And if I think the comments do have a word limit, I will just break them up into 2 comments. Something like that. So, in fact, what I would probably do is a reply to the comments. There are all kinds of technical reasons why it's hard to do, but if I'm forced to break it up into a couple of comments, I will use some method to break it up in a couple of comments in the comments section. All right, because the most important write-up that I do all summer will be the definitions write-up, and that should be up there. There's one exception. If I get a write-up from a Christian providing what they think is representative of a Christian definition of these terms, I might include that in the blog post in the write-ups. Otherwise, expect the write-ups to just show up in the comments. Now, if you would like some other version of the write-up, at the end of the summer, my plan here, whether I do it or not is still up in the air, but my plan is, to collect all of the write-ups that I do for this next 12 weeks or so, all of the write-ups, and put them into a single file and make an ebook out of them, which I will leave as a free download on the site somehow, if I can figure out how to put things there for download. We'll see about that. If I don't figure it out, it will be something that you can just send an email and request a copy of that. So that will be available so that you'll have a kind of a very convenient format to see all of the write-ups that I do. But the main reason to not break this up into different pages is for the comment section. It becomes very challenging to follow threads across 10 or 12 pages, 10 or 12 separate blog pages, just to follow a thread. And even though I might be on the 8th or 9th show, people will be commenting and responding to things that were, from the first show and so forth. And so it just becomes kind of impossible for comments to work over that many pages. And so I'm doing this to have a single page for the comments, also a single page for all of the shows. So what I will be adding in the blog are the podcasts and or videos, and I may just add the videos when there's video at the top of the page. You'll still get your podcasts wherever you're getting your podcast from now. But when I do video, I might just post the video only up there. And that will be the only change from show to show. So every week you will want to refresh the page and, check out the new show. That's enough housekeeping, I think, for now. This is a debate between Shelley Keegan, a moral philosopher, and William Lane Craig, a blowhard. I'm sorry, I've lost all respect for William Lane Craig. Now, this video is from a time when I had a lot of respect for William Lane Craig, but I think he gets his ass handed to him, and rightfully so. We are going to skip the Keegan section of the openings. It's brilliant, and you should watch it. It takes about 20 minutes. If you do not watch it, you will be cheating yourself out of very good commentary. That said, a lot of what he says is stuff that I have also said, and I've put in the blogs, and they'll be in my comments. And so it would have just been repetitious if I had played it, but you really should watch it to understand just how lost the moral argument position is. It's fabulous. What we're going to do, because Craig went second, we're going to start with Craig, and we're going to only do his opening this week, which is 20 minutes. I will be bloviating, so this might be a long podcast. We will see. And I'll try not to be too repetitious, but Craig is being repetitious a lot, and so it's kind of hard, but what I want you to listen for is just how empty and vapid and hopeless the moral argument position is. You'll also hear me drinking water and swallowing and things like that in the background. Apologies. It's just the nature of my throat, my allergies, my postnasal drip, all of that. It's really bad for podcasting into sensitive microphones. So with that said, let's hear what I think is maybe the best recitation and defense of the moral argument, and watch it crumble to dust.
Thank you very much. I didn't realize it had been that many Veritas Forum events over these years. Good evening, and thank you very much. I am delighted to have the invitation from the Veritas Forum to participate in the dialogue tonight, and I want to say it's a tremendous privilege to be sharing the podium with so eminent an ethicist as Shelley Keegan. The question before us this evening is God necessary for morality? Notice what the question is not asking. We are not asking whether belief in God is necessary for morality. No one in tonight's discussion is arguing that in order to live a moral life, you need to believe in God.
Also, note that is not in the discussion is how you recognize what is moral, what is actually moral, all the questions that are important in a moral life. This is just a high-level philosophical onanism party.
Rather, the question, as Shelley emphasized, is whether God is necessary for morality. And the answer to that question, I think, obviously depends on what you mean by morality. If by morality you mean simply a certain pattern of social behavior prevalent among human beings, then obviously this sort of behavior could still go on even if it turned out that God does not exist.
Okay, and so we're done. I said it was going to be 20 minutes. That's it. I could stop there. I could just go home and stop. Because that was although limited, a fair synopsis of morality. It's what it is. I'll take that definition. But understand that Craig is defining it for what he thinks the atheist believes. I would just say that that's a fair synopsis of morality. And Craig has acknowledged that if that's morality, if that's what you think morality is, you can go home and stop at this point. Because you don't need God for it. And we're done. But we're not.
God isn't necessary in order for human beings to exhibit certain patterns of social behavior, which they call acting morally. But if by morality you mean that certain things are really good or evil, that certain actions are unconditionally obligatory or impermissible, then many atheists and theists alike agree that God is indeed necessary for morality.
Okay. First of all, atheists wouldn't agree that God is necessary for anything because they're atheists, right? So they don't believe in God. But let's just say that we're talking about some other form of magic. If people rise from the dead, then it implies, in fact, requires that God exists. Well, that's not correct. It just means that someone rose from the dead. That still is not a proof that God exists, okay? That's proof that somebody rose from the dead, and you still have to do all of the work to figure out why. And so if objective morality does exist, objective values and duties, if that exists, that does not equate to, therefore, God exists. That equates to objective duties and values exist. And then we have to do all of the work to figure out what that is and why. I wanted to interrupt slightly earlier, so I'm going to go back.
And beings to exhibit certain patterns of social behavior, which they call acting morally. But if by morality you mean that certain things are really good or evil.
There we go. All right, so we get that term a lot. Yeah, but I get that you think this thing is good, but is it really good? I get that you think this thing is evil, but is it really evil? Really is doing a lot of work here. Is it evil in actuality? Is it evil for real, or is it just kind of evil? I mean, it's a stupid question as it's formed, and it's because the word really is being overloaded with a lot of innuendo that they don't like to say out loud.
That certain actions are unconditionally obligatory or impermissible.
Okay, and they do not believe that actions are unconditionally obligatory or impermissible. They simply do not. Once the conversation gets started about morals themselves, a Christian can justify almost anything, right? They're going to justify more evils than an atheist can. Seen it happen time and time again. Keep tuning into this channel as the conversation heats up. You will see it happening time and time again. I will be dropping videos throughout the week, every week, where it's shown that Christians are just as situational with their morality as anybody else. In fact, in my write-up, which is obnoxiously 4,300 and some odd words thereabout, I highlight that in the write-up. You will see it time and time again. There are very few, if any, actions where Christians would say, this is unconditionally good, or it's unconditionally forbidden. They're extremely situational, so do not buy into that BS.
Then many atheists and theists alike agree that God is indeed necessary for morality. In the absence of God, morality turns out to be just a human convention or illusion. The same patterns of social behavior might go on without God, but it would be a delusion to think that such behavior has any objective moral significance.
Okay. So again, he says without God, not without believing in God, but without God, the same patterns of behavior would still exist, which kind of destroys the overall claim. I understand why it doesn't, but in practical terms it does. Because if we could just ask, well, if the same behaviors and I would add thought process of moral and immoral would exist without God, then what is your point? Who cares if it gets this extra tag that is important to you, objectively wrong? Who cares if it's really right or it's really wrong? Doesn't matter if it's metaphysically right or if it's metaphysically wrong. Don't care. There's no practical use for a thing being really right or really wrong, since we would get the same behaviors anyway. So you can add whatever words to it you want that help you sleep at night, but I can just as easily say there's no God and no objective morality, and according to you, I still get the same behaviors, same results. So what are we arguing about? Let me just roll that back. Let you hear that one more time.
Behavior might go on with, or illusion. The same patterns of social behavior might go on without God, but it would be a delusion to think that such behavior has any objective moral significance.
Correct.
Accordingly, I'm going to argue that God is necessary for morality in at least three distinct ways. Without God, objective moral values, moral duties, and moral accountability would not exist.
Okay, so enumerating values, duties, and accountability doesn't change anything that you've said before. Okay, because everything would go on exactly as it would without God. So you can enumerate these points. You could add several more points, and it wouldn't change anything. What I want the listener to remember is twice at this point, Craig saying, yeah, okay, there wouldn't be any difference in behavior. But you just wouldn't have the good, warm, fuzzy feeling that a thing is objectively good or bad, right? So I don't care, if you want to pull out moral duties, moral values, and moral accountability, because you're not saying anything that would make any practical difference in the way we live our lives right now.
Let's look at the first point. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Now, when we talk about moral values, we're talking about whether something is good or evil. To say that there
Okay. Nothing can be good or evil. When I wrote last week that morality doesn't exist, this is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about, all right? And so I described it in a very secular way, and my description was something to the effect that what we call morality is how we feel about certain social events. How we feel about the description of those events. That man shot that other man and tried to steal his wallet. Right? That's a social event. That is not a good event. It's not a bad event. There's no good or bad inherent in the events. It's just a thing that happened in nature, kind of like when a volcano belches up lava and destroys a town of, a couple of thousand people at the base of the mountain. That's not a good event. That's not a bad event. It's just a thing that happened in nature. Okay, the good and the bad of it, which we don't tend to apply to natural things, so that man shot that other man and tried to steal his wallet, we might say that is a bad thing. That man did a bad thing, and what we're saying is we feel like that was bad. It feels bad to us, all right? But that's only because we are creatures that can evaluate things and feel a certain way about them. But there's nothing inherent in the event itself. For instance, we could add more details to that event and say that man, the one who did the shooting, was an FBI agent, and he shot that other man being a terrorist. And the FBI agent gave him many verbal warnings and warning shots before he shot him. And the wallet that was taken actually contained a small transmitter that, if pressed, would blow up New York City. Okay? So we add some details around that, and suddenly that man shot that other man and tried to take his wallet is not evil, but good. Right? But the event itself has not changed. The only thing that has changed is how we feel about it when we look at certain details. Okay, so that's in a nutshell how I describe morality. Read the multi-thousand-word write-up if you want more color on that.
Our objective.
Just going to go back.
When we talk about moral values, we're talking about whether something is good or evil.
Right, and that's kind of why I got in that diatribe. Things in themselves, events in themselves, cannot be good or evil, good and evil. And I would like to say righteousness and evil, because when a Christian says good, they mean righteous. They don't mean socially beneficial. Right? That's a key difference. Things do not contain the quality of righteousness and evil. Such objective qualities that can be a part of the makeup of a thing itself does not exist.
To say that there are objective moral values is to say that something is good or evil independently of whether anybody believes it to be so. To say, for example, that the Holocaust was objectively evil is to say that it was evil, even though the Nazis who carried it out thought that it was good.
Okay. So it's time for me to say something awful. I do this every now and then. So I want to just shock your system a little bit and make you think. The Holocaust was not evil. The Holocaust was the Holocaust. It happened. 6 million Jews were destroyed. Intentionally. They were murdered, annihilated in a horrible manner. That's not evil. That's an event that happened in history. It is no more evil than my carpet is evil. If you saw the condition of my carpet, you might think that it was evil. It's not, and events are also not evil. So just, trying to pull up the most emotionally involved, the most emotionally charged event you can think of and say, you see, that's evil. No, it's not. That's an event. Now, we describe that event as evil. But what that's saying is how we feel about the event. Hitler felt a different way about the event. Many Germans felt a different way about the event. And so in that sense, we had different moral instincts. But in reality doesn't try to determine whose moral instincts are right or wrong. There's nothing in nature that cares one way or the other about the rightness or the wrongness of an event, because it's not a part of nature. It's simply a part of how we feel about a thing that's in nature. And I'm glad that we can have feelings about things. I'm glad that we can look at historical events largely agree that that event was terrible, that things should have been done that weren't done, and maybe aid and comfort that Christians gave Hitler was a bad idea. I think that, all Christians should be able to say that, even though they don't. And so we can do things to prevent this sort of thing from happening again, right? So we can learn from this historical event, but the event itself is amoral. In fact, even to call it amoral is just a category error. An event is no more amoral than a doorknob. It's simply incapable of that sort of thing. All we're describing in events, even awful events, is a thing that happened in nature. And what we're describing is how we feel about that thing. And those descriptions are useful, especially when they're broadly agreed upon. But even that has limited utility, which either we will talk about in this podcast or that I talk about in some detail in the write-up.
It would still have been evil even if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in brainwashing or exterminating everybody who disagreed with them so that everyone believed the Holocaust was good.
Okay. And here, this is where I want to say the utility value of the moral argument breaks down. So not only is it bad philosophically, breaks down almost immediately, but any usefulness, any practical usefulness of the moral argument is also non-existent. It has no practicality at all. So in his example, if Hitler wins and everybody speaks German, and everybody in the world who exists at that point says Heil Hitler, okay? Then what practical use did your objective morality do for you? What did it do? It didn't change anything. It didn't change the fact that Hitler did what he did. It didn't change the fact that the church was comfortable standing idly by and watching Hitler do what he did. It wouldn't have changed whether Hitler won or lost. It wouldn't have changed whether everybody was brainwashed into thinking that Hitler was good. Your moral argument and your righteous sense that was absolutely objectively wrong would not have changed the fact that you would still be on your knees shouting Heil Hitler. Doesn't change anything in your scenario, because that would be a scenario that happened in history. All right. And the only thing that would exist as far as this moral argument is concerned is that you think it's wrong. In fact, you know it's wrong. You're righteously certain that it's wrong. And the world would still be shouting Heil Hitler. There's zero utility in the moral argument. And so if you're listening to the moral argument and you're looking for some kind of practical utility, you're looking in the wrong place.
My first claim is that if there is no God, then moral values are not objective in that sense.
Correct. I agree that moral values are not objective in that sense. So there is no God. Keep going.
Traditionally, objective moral values have been based in God.
No, they haven't. Well, yeah, no, I was going to say no, they haven't. The world has had, various formulations of morality and, loosely objective morality without religion for a very long time. Yes, religion has also been there, also been prevalent, but that's not the only thing that's been out there. So don't fall for that.
Who is the highest good? He is the locus and paradigm of moral value.
Okay, so he's talking about God. God's the paradigm and locus, well, he does love locusts, of moral values. So I get the sense that William Lane Craig is talking about his God, Yahweh, Jehovah, Elohim, Father, Jesus, Bob. He's talking about that God. But if you go back and look at the moral argument, you could grant the entire moral argument just for fun, and then at the end of it, say Hel Wahagaru. What would be incorrect about that? Wahagaru, one true God. All morality comes through Wahagaru. All morality comes through Allah. All morality comes through Ganesh. Any God, the argument itself does not specify, and it doesn't show any difference or preference between one God and another. Now, in a sense, it does, because when it says God, we know that the framers of this argument meant Yahweh. But again, it doesn't say that in the argument. You could just grant the argument, and now Wahagaru is the ground of all morality. Ask the Christians to prove otherwise. You can't.
God's own holy and loving
They can't.
nature supplies the absolute standard against which all actions are measured. Is the value. God's own holy and loving nature.
We are going to talk about God's own holy and loving nature at some point. It's a long summer. Give it some time. So if I skip over some of these points, it's not because I didn't know they were there. It's because I didn't want to make this a 5-hour podcast.
Supplies the absolute standard against which all actions are measured. He is by nature loving, generous, just, faithful, kind, and so forth.
Yeah, he's by nature, I would say by definition. What you're doing is creating a definition. You're saying, yep, that's God. But that's called defining God into existence.
And thus, if God exists, objective moral values exist. But if God does not exist...
See, I could say that that second planet to the left in the next star system over, that planet, its nature is just and righteous and good. That's the nature of that planet, and therefore that's the ground of morality. And how do we know that that planet is all of those things? Because I defined it that way.
Exist, what basis remains for objective moral values? In particular, why think that human beings would have moral worth? On the atheistic...
Okay, so I want you to know there's a shift here. There's a subject change shift. This, in modern parlance, would probably be called a gish gallop. And so he's mounted up the gish and is getting ready to gallop. We were talking about objective moral values here, and now he wants to switch over to intrinsic worth of humans. It's a different topic. He's going to try to mesh all of that together. This is why it can be hard to debate William Lane Craig, because people allow him to gallop all over the place, and there's no one in these opening speeches in particular to stop him. So he loads up a bunch of stuff. We're going to see him doing this later, too. Just loads of a bunch of stuff, some of which aren't even relevant to the topic, leaving the opponent to try to respond to everything that he said, which is a fool's errand. What they should be saying is, I do not recognize your gish gallop.
You human beings are just accidental byproducts of nature, which have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust called the planet Earth, lost somewhere in a hostile and mindless universe in which are doomed to perish individually and collectively in a relatively short time. On atheism, I can't see any reason to think that human well-being is objectively good.
Okay. I'm going to play that clip again. But basically what he's saying is, if the universe is going to end one day and we're all going to die one day, a billion years down the road, then I just don't see what the point is of humanity. I don't see why they would have any worth, why they would have any value, why their well-being means anything. This is a scary Christian. Okay, this is exactly the reason why we call Christianity evil, at least those of us who do, because it produces ideas like this. And so I want people who think like this to remain Christians. I want them to remain in the faith. Please do not listen to my podcasts. Please do not leave, because you're the kind of person who would just pick up an Uzi and just gun down as many people as you can if you think you can get away with it, because you have said that without your God, you just don't see the value in any human at all. And I find that appalling. That would even be a part of your argument. Even if you are not a person who would do that, you're talking to a lot of people who would. And you don't see the problem with that. That's what makes this so, dare I say, evil. That either people agree with you and that your magic fairy exists and is the ground of morality and that we're going to live forever somehow, or the fact that we die means that, kill someone, don't kill them, it's all the same. Life doesn't matter. And that's just wrong at every level. No one should respect this man.
Universe in which are doomed to perish individually and collectively. Mock of dust called the...
Okay. This is his existential angst speech. This is maybe the grounding of all of Christianity. Certainly apologetics, certainly the moral argument. It's about fear and the idea that you may not be all that. Let's see if we can...
In the atheistic view, human beings are just accidental byproducts of nature, which have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust called the planet Earth, lost somewhere in a hostile and mindless universe in which are doomed to perish individually and collectively.
You see how much fear and disgust is put into each one of these descriptions. And yet I would agree to every one of these descriptions. So sorry, humans. You're not that special. And the universe is really big, doesn't even know you're here. There's not a damn thing that you could do to make the universe give a shit. And the universe is going to crush your species like a bug. There's not a damn thing that you can do about that either. You individually are gonna die. There is no chariot that will ride you to heaven and allow you to escape death. It's not going to happen. You're going to die. The human species is going to die. There will be no one left to read the books that we wrote, including the Bible. And if that makes you nervous, if that gives you the jitters, see a counselor.
In a relatively short time. On atheism, I can't see any reason to think that human well-being is objectively good.
Please don't ever become an atheist. First of all, we don't want you. That's a pretty broad statement. I'm speaking for all atheists. We don't want your kind here. But secondly, if you are right about your instinct, you're a very dangerous individual if you ever lose your faith.
Any more than insect well-being or dog well-being or monkey well-being. On a naturalistic view, moral values are just the byproduct of biological evolution and social conditioning. just as a
Right.
troop of baboons exhibit cooperative and even altruistic behavior
Correct.
because natural selection has determined it to be advantageous in the struggle for survival.
Correct.
So their primate cousins, Homo sapiens, have similarly evolved behavior for the same reason.
Great. You have read a
As a
biology
result
book.
of sociobiological pressures, there has evolved among Homo sapiens a sort of herd morality which
you.
functions well in the perpetuation of our species.
Done.
But on an atheistic view, there doesn't seem to be anything that makes this morality objectively true.
Why does it need to be
The
objectively true?
philosopher of science, Michael
Hang on.
Root,
Why does it need to be objectively true? You've just given away the game. Okay? Objective truth not required. You've just given a perfectly naturalistic explanation of why we have what we call morality. Perfectly naturalistic explanation. And yet you're still saying that something's missing. Yeah, but it's not really real. Things aren't really good or really evil. And yet, from a perfectly naturalistic, practical point of view, we end up in the same place without a God as you think we would with a God. The only thing you don't get is this heartwarming certainty that your ideas of good and evil are actually good and evil, which from a practical point of view counts for nothing. Now, he's going to start quoting a bunch of people that you've never heard of. You've heard of Michael Roos. You've heard of other people that you've probably not read. Other people you will not have heard of. This is an academic trick as well. Let's call out some people who say some things that I can maybe use against the other side that most people have never heard of, as if these are the prophets of those people, and that we think that whatever those people say must be true. Craig, we do not have prophets. Okay, we don't have prophets. I don't give a shit what you're about to read and who you're about to quote. It matters not in the grand scheme of things. And the other thing that you should look out for is Christians misquoting and quoting out of context. It happens all the time. And so when they read a quote and they say such and such a person, you don't know whether they're telling the truth about that or not. But if they're quoting something that you know about and people that you've read, you can almost always point out, yeah, you have misrepresented this person with that quote. So we're getting into academic quote territory, which in an argument like this, I say, is absolutely meaningless.
reports, the position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," they think they are referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory.
Correct.
End quote. If we were to rewind the film of human evolution back to the beginning and start anew, people with a very different set of moral values might well have evolved. As Darwin himself wrote in The Descent of Man, if men were raised under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers.
Correct. Yes. That's right. And you know how we know that? Because that's how hive bees evolved, right? And so if you're saying that we had an evolutionary path exactly like hive bees, first of all, we wouldn't be humans, we'd be hive bees. But even if we did have some other physical form, we'd have to take that in, factor that into the situation. But let's assume that our physicality as humans doesn't change anything about our social behavior. Yes, we would have evolved to believe that. But we didn't evolve to believe that. Hive bees did. If hive bees evolved, had the same circumstances as humans did, and evolved in that way, they would have our sense of moral value and behavior because they'd have bigger brains, more complicated nervous systems, all that. So this is not some kind of gotcha. Oh, you mean if you evolved like whales, then rape would be okay? Yes. Yes, it would. Why is that a problem? It's not a problem because whales evolved that way. It's true now. Any creature that evolved that way, any creature with that kind of social structure over a long period of time would evolve that way. And you don't think of that as bad. So humans evolved the way we did because of our place in the ecosystem, our physicality, our bio-social, cultural, evolutionary processes to evolve the way we did. If what Craig wants to do is create this kind of this angst, this moral angst that says, yeah, well, if you roll back the clock and evolve, run it another way, then we think that rape is good. Yeah, maybe. If we were whales, yeah, we would evolve to kill our male children, and that would be okay. Yes, it would. if we evolved exactly the way lions did, absolutely. So, you should kind of remove this emotional sting that this argument is supposed to try to have here. This is all he's doing, is attempting some kind of emotional manipulation to get you, the kind of creature that you are, that evolved this way, to imagine what would happen if you evolved a different way. And your natural reaction is to say, "Oh, yuck! I don't want to be a baboon. Gross." Right? That's all this is. It is empty. It's manipulative. Dare I say, immoral.
And mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. For us to think that human beings are special and our morality objectively true is to succumb to the temptation of speciesism, that is to say, an unjustified bias toward one's own species. The objective worthlessness of human beings on a naturalistic worldview is underscored by two implications of that worldview: materialism and determinism. Naturalists are typically
I'm just going to go ahead and disagree on that point altogether. We might do a module on materialism and determinism. Probably won't be in the summer of morality, though. I see those as very different issues. All right, back on your gish, buddy.
Materialists or physicalists who regard man as a purely animal organism. But if there is no mind distinct from the brain, then everything we think and do is determined by the input of our five senses and our genetic makeup. There is no personal agent who freely decides to do something. But without freedom, none of our choices is morally significant. They're like the jerks of a puppet's limbs, controlled by the strings of sensory input and physical constitution.
You mean like when God hardened Pharaoh's hearts when Pharaoh was getting ready to let the people go several times and God's saying, nope, I got more plagues to unpack, buddy?
And what moral value does a puppet or its movements have?
Or Pharaoh?
Richard Dawkins' assessment of human worth may be depressing, but why, on atheism, is he mistaken when he says, there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being. If there is no God, then any basis for regarding the herd morality evolved by Homo sapiens as objectively true seems to have been removed. Take God out of the picture, and all you seem to be left with is an ape-like creature on a tiny speck of dust beset with delusions of moral grandeur.
Okay, so what's wrong with that? I mean, really, I'm just running straight at it here. Christians, uh, philosophically minded non-Christians, just take that statement and then add, so what? So I'm challenging you. So what's wrong with that? Oh, did you think that you were some kind of god? Oh yeah, because your special book said you're made in the image of God. You're special. And your existential angst says, I want to be special, and they say I'm not special.
Secondly, if God does not exist, objective moral duties do not exist.
They don't.
Duties,
Therefore, God does not exist.
have to do with whether something is right or wrong. Now, you might think at first that the distinction between right and wrong is the same as the distinction between good and evil. But if you think about it, you can see that this is not the case.
This is a point that I made last week. I don't know if I had more to say about it this week. It's all kind of blending together. Secularists tend to talk about right and wrong. I tend to talk about right and wrong, good and bad. When Christians say good and evil, the good in what they're saying is different from your good. And so I like to mark that off as righteousness and evil. And they are very, very different things than what a secular means by right and wrong or good and bad.
Duty has to do with moral obligation, with what I ought or ought not to do. But obviously, you're not morally obligated to do something just because it would be good for you to do it. For example, it would be good for you to become a doctor, but you're not morally obligated to become a doctor.
Okay, before we get too far down this road, there's a Bible passage. I'm not going to look it up or read it. I'll just cite it from memory. He that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. We used to debate this one a lot in church. Comes to mind now, and maybe there's some room to talk about that on the board. But I think that maybe one of those biblical authors would like to have words with you, Bill.
After all, it would also be good for you to become a firefighter or a homemaker or a diplomat, but you can't do them all. So there's a difference between moral values and moral duties. Now, my
Yeah, you know what you could do, though? You could sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor.
claim is that if God does not exist, then it seems we have no objective moral duties.
We don't, therefore God does not exist.
To say that we have objective moral duties is again to say that we have certain moral obligations regardless of whether we think that we do. Traditionally, our moral duties were thought to spring from God's commandments, such as the Ten Commandments. Far from being arbitrary, these commands flow necessarily from his moral nature.
First of all, which set of commandments are you talking about? Because there are a couple of sets of the Ten Commandments, and they do not flow naturally from a modern perspective.
On this foundation, we can affirm the objective rightness of love, generosity,
Wait a minute. On the basis of the Ten Commandments? That's what objective morality is based on? Here, let me take that back a little bit.
Flow necessarily from his moral nature. On this foundation,
Okay, so I think he's saying the Ten Commandments flow from the moral nature of God, which is the foundation for objective morality. It's a little bit convoluted, but
we can affirm the objective rightness of love, generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality, and condemn as objectively wrong selfishness, hatred, abuse, discrimination, and oppression.
so I fully intend to do a show on God's nature. So I know a lot of you will have some comments on that. Feel free to leave the comments. I will be reading them as I prepare for that topic. I don't think that it'll be next week, but it's coming.
But if there is no God, what basis remains for objective moral duties? On the atheistic view, human beings are just animals, and animals have no moral obligations to one another.
Not so. Maybe you didn't read the whole biology book after all.
When a lion kills a zebra, it kills the zebra, but it doesn't murder the zebra. When a great white shark forcibly copulates with a female, it forcibly copulates with her, but it does not rape her, for there is no moral dimension to these actions.
Right, kind of like God's soldiers. You know, when they killed all the small children, it wasn't murder. They just killed them. And when they saved the little girls who were too young to be diddled and kept them as slave wives, that wasn't rape. Never mind.
They are neither prohibited nor obligatory. So, if God does not exist, why think that we have any moral obligations to do anything?
If God does exist, the same question applies. See, from a practical value, adding God into the mix doesn't change human behavior. And we know that because we can look at the human behavior of people who believe in God and people who don't.
Who or what imposes these moral duties upon us? Where did they come from? It's very hard to see why they would be anything more than a subjective impression ingrained into us by societal and parental conditioning.
Why would it need to be more than that?
On the atheistic view, certain actions, such as incest or rape, may not be biologically and socially advantageous, and so in the course of human development have become taboo. They go against the social contract that Shelley has imagined. But that does absolutely nothing to show that rape and incest is really wrong. Such behavior goes on all the time in the animal
In the Bible.
kingdom. On the atheistic view, the rapist who flouts the herd morality or the social contract is doing nothing more serious than acting unfashionably.
Okay, and so this is where he is kind of lying. I think I'd have to use that strong of a word here. Now, I believe in good reductionism because in order to talk about any complicated subject, you've got to reduce it down to things that you can talk about within a certain time period, things that you can write about, with a certain word count. So good reductionism is good. It's called summaries. Okay, we summarize things all the time. Compress your summaries into an elevator pitch so that you can get the gist. So reductionist is not the thing that he's doing badly. He's just doing bad reductionism in a way that's intended to mislead. The rapist is just acting unfashionably. I could almost grant that, but I understand the intent, which is wrong. What he's leaving out is if you're a rapist in a secular society, we will do one of two things with you because of our shared morality, our negotiated morality that allows us to live as a society. We are going to either throw you in a cage and keep you there for a very long time, or we're going to put you in a chair and run a lot of current through it and kill your ass. So if you think that it's merely being unfashionable, then you're thinking incorrectly. And this is the kind of thing that Craig is trying to present. You see, those secularists, they have no answer for this kind of behavior. Go ahead and rape somebody, Bill. I would love to see the look on your face when you realize that there are, in fact, consequences even in a secular society for things of that nature. Bill, you goddamn liar. As far as someone belching loudly at a meal, go ahead and do that. that's not without consequences either. Do it enough, embarrass your hosts enough, and you will not be invited to parties anymore. There are consequences. Pretending like there's no consequences, no accountability is about to get an accountability under a secular morality is absurd. It's wrong. It's a lie. And he knows it's a lie because he has already said at least twice that without God, we would still develop the same ways. The only difference is there would be no way to say it's really right or really wrong, which is irrelevant because you would just as, all the same, you would really be in a cage or really dead.
Like the man who flouts etiquette by belching loudly at the dinner table. If there is no moral lawgiver, then there is no objective moral law which we must obey. It's all a matter of social convention on a par with rules of etiquette. Thirdly, if God does not exist, then there is no basis for moral accountability. Traditionally, it's been held that God holds all persons morally accountable for their actions. Despite the inequities of this life, in the end, the scales of God's justice will be balanced.
And this is one of those, for the Bible tells you so, moments, hat tip to apologia, or as I used to say, maybe apologia stole it from me. It's in that book over there. There's no connection with reality to this fantasy. This is just Christian fantasy. Look at this man's face in this freeze frame here. He doesn't look like a formidable adult. When you listen to him and understand what he's saying, the fear in his heart, he looks like a small child that's afraid of the dark.
And thus, the moral choices that we make in this life have an eternal significance. But if God does not exist, what basis remains for moral accountability? Even if there were objective duties and values under atheism, they seem to be irrelevant because there's no moral accountability.
And yet, our jails are full. For the record, I'm not in favor of prisons, but that's the system we've got. Our jails are full. Our Green Mile dockets are busy. Our fine collectors are wealthy. There's all kinds of moral accountability baked into the system.
If life ends at the grave, then ultimately it makes no difference whether you live as a Stalin or as a Mother Teresa.
Again, this is about the stupidest thing a Christian can say. If I die and there's nothing that happens after I die, then it doesn't matter what I do in this life. You goddamn fool. You sociopath. The only one who thinks like that is a fucking sociopath. William Lane Craig is a goddamn sociopath.
As the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky rightly said.
Okay, raise your hand. How many of you have read Dostoevsky? Okay, why are we talking about Dostoevsky?
If there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. Given the finality of death, it really does not matter how you live. The state torturers in Soviet prisons understood this all too well.
Okay, yeah, let's continue finding ways to gain moral knowledge from some of the most barbaric time in Soviet history. Okay, Bill, what else do you have that's informing you that you're going to straw man and say, yes, this is secular morality? Do not fall for this, people.
Richard Wurmbrandt reports,
don't care.
The cruelty of atheism is hard to believe when man has no faith in the reward of good or the punishment of evil.
Right, kind of like the Crusaders who got, what do you call it when they, when the church would grant them these immunities? Brain block goes to mind. You know what I'm thinking about, though. Okay, that's going to bother me for the rest of the podcast. Kind of, they were kind of pre-pardoned for crimes that they would do in the execution of their duties. And then they could just do anything and not worry about it. I didn't learn that from Soviet Russia. I learned that from Christians.
There is no reason to be human. There is no restraint from the depths of evil which is in man. The communist torturers often said, there is no God, no hereafter, no punishment for evil. We can do what we wish.
In other words, they're like you. They were fucking sociopaths.
I have heard one torturer even say, I thank God in whom I don't believe that I have lived to this hour when I can express all the evil in my heart.
Which is exactly what you have been saying that you would do if there was no God. Because you don't see the difference between that, murdering a child and helping a child. That's you, Bill. We don't need to go to Russia for that. That's you. That's your fucked up mind.
He expressed it in unbelievable brutality and torture inflicted on prisoners. Given the finality of death, it really doesn't matter how you live. So, what do you say to someone who concludes that we may as well just live as we please out of pure self-interest? You might say it's in your best self-interest to adopt a moral lifestyle. But clearly that's not always true. We all know situations where self-interest runs smack dab in the face of morality. Moreover, if you're sufficiently powerful, like a Ferdinand Marcos or a Papadoc Duvalier or even a Donald Trump,
or half the preachers of megachurches,
then one can pretty much ignore the dictates of conscience and safely live in self-indulgence. Historian Stuart C. Easton sums it up well when he writes, there is no objective reason why man should be moral unless morality pays off in his social life or makes him feel good. There is no objective reason why man should do anything save for the pleasure it affords him. To believe, then, that God does not exist and that there is thus no moral accountability would be quite literally demoralizing.
Okay, I just want you to look at one other practical proof that what Bill is saying is bullshit. Just look at the world around you. If you live in an apartment or a housing community, look your neighbor to the left, look the neighbor to your right. Have they murdered any children today? No. No? Okay. Look in your community. Are most people sociopaths? No. No? Okay, no. I know more Christians, no, personally, no, more Christians who have committed heinous acts than I know skeptics. In fact, I don't think I'm going to ever know enough skeptics who are evil to account for the number of Christians that I have personally known and dealt with who have committed heinous acts and did so until they were caught and stopped. And sometimes, released and then continue to do. Now, you might say that I had a unique position in church leadership to know some things about people than others, but I would say that your average member in the pew also has plenty of experience with Christians committing heinous acts. So in a church, you look to the person on your left, to the person on your right, there's a much higher chance that one of those is a pedophile than your secular neighborhood. Yeah, I don't mind being challenged on that. That's fine. It's hyperbole. But what I'm pointing to is your own natural experience of living around secular people and living around Christian people. You should recognize that not having a God in your belief system does not make you somehow a sociopathic monster, and then having a God in your belief system keeps you from being a sociopathic monster. This is bullshit. It's ad hominem. It's disingenuous. It's dishonest. Craig knows. that the argument he's making is simply to manipulate the emotions of Christians who don't think very deeply about any of this stuff and who trust him when he says stuff. Craig, you are a goddamn fucking sociopathic liar.
For then we'd have to accept that our moral choices are ultimately insignificant, since both our fate and that of the universe will be the same regardless of what we do. By demoralization, I mean a deterioration of moral motivation. It's hard to do the right thing when that means sacrificing your self-interest, or to resist temptation when desire is strong.
And yet, there are many secularist firemen, police officers, rescuers, soldiers, full of shit.
And the belief that ultimately it doesn't matter what you choose or what you do is apt to sap one's moral strength and so undermine one's moral life. As Robert Adams,
every Christian I personally know who became a secularist, who left Christianity, it's not just me, everyone that I personally know has lived and experienced a far more moral/ethical life than they ever had in the church. There are reasons for that. But I suspect you know that too, Bill. You're just a liar.
Observes, having to regard it as very likely that the history of the universe will not be good on the whole, no matter what one does, seems apt to induce a cynical sense of futility about the moral life, undermining one's moral resolve and one's interest in moral considerations. The absence of moral accountability from the philosophy of atheism thus makes an ethic of compassion and self-sacrifice a hollow abstraction. In sum, I think it's plausible.
In sum, I think you are a hollow abstraction.
That without God, there are no objective moral values, moral duties, or moral accountability. God is therefore vitally necessary to morality. Now, as I said, this is a conclusion which is accepted by a great many atheist philosophers, such as Nietzsche, Russell, and Sartre. Though the conclusion is a painful one, these thinkers believe that honesty compels them to face it squarely.
I just want you to notice the irony in that statement. Though it's a painful conclusion, their honesty compels them. These are atheist scholars who are compelled by honesty to say something painful. Did you notice that irony, Bill? No, you didn't, you goddamn fool.
The challenge confronting the atheist philosopher, who continues to cling to objective moral values and duties after letting go of God, is, I think, threefold. First, to explain what is the basis for objective moral values on atheism. In particular, what is the basis for the intrinsic value of human beings?
Okay, so we've gotten on the horse named Gish again. You're kind of overloading your point one.
Second, to explain what is the source of objective moral duties on atheism. What makes certain acts obligatory or forbidden if there is no moral lawgiver to command or prohibit them? Why?
Okay, this is Bill pretending like he doesn't know the many objective moral theories on atheism, secularism. Now, I don't agree with any of them. Let me take that back. I agree with all of them. I just don't agree that they're objective. Okay, but these are, I also don't believe that the Christian moral philosophy is objective either. So I don't believe that objectivity exists in the moral realm. But to pretend like there aren't those who propose moral philosophies as secularists, he doesn't know any of these, doesn't know that any of these might exist. It's just him lying again, trying to tell his audience that such arguments do not exist and there can't be any argument for objective morality without God. He knows very well that there can. Just look at his face in this freeze frame. That is the face of a fucking liar.
Is it wrong to harm other members of our species, to inflict harm upon others? Thirdly, to explain how on atheism ultimate moral accountability exists, or alternatively, to explain why it is not necessary to morality. These questions must, I think, be addressed if one is to maintain that God is not necessary to morality.
And so that is the end of his speech. His 3 points at the end, things that atheists must explain, are all wrong, because atheists mustn't explain any of that. None of that is necessary for atheists to have a good moral society. You don't need it. He said it at least twice, possibly 3 times in his 20-minute diatribe, that take away God, you'd still have the behaviors. It's just that no one would be able to claim that they're really right or really wrong. Well, I don't care about that. It doesn't matter to me. And so the fact is, whether you call the values we have objective or not, we still have moral values. We still observe moral duties. We still have moral accountability, and we don't need to explain the objectivity of any of it because it's not objective. It is as fully functional, though, as any system you can come up with as a Christian. So what you need to explain is why any of that stuff needs to be objective by your definition. Are there going to be more righteous people if you say homosexuality is objectively immoral? Is that going to help? Does that change anything for you? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The moral argument is a head fake. It is an argument that tries to get you to stop focusing on morality. We're not going to let that stand. Now, I'm thinking that I'm going to do the rest of this video next week. As you can see on the little slider, we're about halfway. You've got some conversation between these two. We've got some Q&A. I may not do that. I may call this one a day. So rather than announce my topic for next week, I will leave it open-ended that I might move to the next topic in my plan, because I really think that the moral argument is a very dishonest argument. And if I get a lot of pushback from that, then maybe I'll continue on with this. Otherwise, we might talk about something else. I've gotten myself all worked up. I didn't plan to get this worked up over this video because I've seen it a couple of times. It just makes me mad every time. It really does. And I think part of that mad for me, part of the emotional spillage that you're getting here, is because even as an atheist, I really respected William Lane Craig. And I see him these days in a whole different light. I feel duped. I almost didn't do this video because I kind of despise this man, and I don't think that he deserves the airtime. He needs to be forgotten as quickly as possible. But, you know, if you're trying to find someone talking about the moral argument these days, the formalized moral argument, it's hard to find material that does not have Craig in it. So we're kind of stuck with this. But okay. All right. There you have it. Let me just say, I would rather talk to Michael Brown again than to talk to William Lane Craig once. So those of you who have been following this channel for a while, you know how sick of a burn that is. All right. So if you want to tell me what an idiot I have been, I'm here for it. Shoot me an email, skeptics and seekers. Wait a minute. You don't have to start with email. You can just go right online and litter my forum with it. skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. Log into your account and discuss away. Send me an email if you prefer that, skepticsandseekers@gmail.com. Until next time, I will see you in the comments. And in the meantime, I'm out.